Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Bechet, and this is the AAF Exchange, a podcast from the American Action Forum, where experts provide clear, data-driven insights into today's economic and domestic policy issues. Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. All right, so what do we want to talk about today? Anything interesting going on in the world?
I re-gifted the ginseng I got from my dry cleaner to Angela.
You got ginseng?
I get a gift from my dry cleaner every year.
Do you keep your dry cleaner in business?
I think I'm probably her best customer by far.
During the pandemic, you definitely did.
And so she's this little tiny Chinese woman, and last year she gave me a rutabaga and a lint roller, and this year I got ginseng pouches, 30 ginseng pouches, and a lint roller. And so I re-gifted it to Angela because she drinks weird shit, and I figured that. Be good for her.
That's awesome. Did you get any weird gifts this year, Jordan?
No.
That's all right. Well,
I got money, which is the thing that everybody universally likes.
I want to be in your family.
We just trade money and Visa gift cards. That's pretty much.
Growing up as a kid, I hated.
That's nice.
You get stockings sometimes. I hated when my parents gave me deodorant or shampoo and shit like that. I was like, that's such a cop out. Now today, I pray it's in there.
Yeah.
As do we.
You
walked into that one. I mean, come on.
Did you make use of the case of travel-sized toothpaste that you got? Did you give those out as stocking stuffers?
No, we consumed those.
Oh, that was fast.
All right, you know what? I'm going to do the introduction. On this episode of the AAF Exchange, the latest on the economy and Congress's day one priority. Joining us to discuss all of this, AAF President Douglas Holtz-Eakin and Director of Fiscal Policy, Jordan Haring. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Before we jump into everything, we have to give the listeners what they want. Doug, tell us what's on your mind.
My rage on the President nixing the Nippon Steel acquisition of the U.S. steel facilities. I mean, this one is genuinely, all kidding aside, just an enormous disgrace. Mm-hmm. This is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, whose job it is to make sure that our capital markets remain open so we can attract capital for valuable investments, but where we don't betray our national security in the process. And it's hard to imagine there's a national security threat from Nippon Steel. I mean, the day before they nixed this deal, we gave them sales of our best missiles. And so I would call them allies. I think they're an important source of capital. They're the biggest investor of foreign direct investment in the United States, and that's from the Department of Commerce's own publication, praising the importance of foreign direct investment. The guys who work in the plants wanted the deal. The leadership of the union did not, which tells you everything that's wrong with union leadership in the United States. And the president nixed it because, he's been the greatest pro-union president, and he's in the pocket of the leadership, and it's indefensible.
Yeah.
These mills will close. Mm-hmm. So what have we accomplished here?
Right.
These guys will be out of work. This is all in Western Pennsylvania, so it's close to home. For the listeners who don't know, I grew up in a steel family. That mill is now gone. Mm-hmm. I mean, it didn't have to be this way.
Yeah.
Do the investments, upgrade the facilities, have a more competitive domestic steel market. All of that's good economics. And
it's pretty stunning that both when economists on the right and the left are both saying this is a dumb idea, this is bad, this is pathetic. I mean, Jason Furman came out with a pretty scathing tweet when it happened, and it's just like when you guys are on the same page, it seems like a bad idea.
Yes, us being on the same page is a bad idea. But no, I mean, I say that lovingly of Jason. We do a lot of business together. But, we don't know. Like, we're not in the room. But all of the rumors that leak out of this process said that the State Department signed off, the National Security Council signed off, Treasury signed off, and USTR, the famous We Don't Want Any Trade organization in the White House, nixed the deal. But it's something really wrong there.
Yeah. And like you said, Japan is one of our number one allies in the region.
A crucial ally right now with China, Korea problems. I mean, this is not someone who you want to declare on the global stage is a threat to the United States. That's insane.
All right, let's move on.
I'm just getting warmed up.
Yeah, well, I bet you this next topic you'll have some stuff to say about. It's been a while since we last spoke, so let's start with an update on the economy. Where do we stand and what are expectations for 2025?
So right now, the economy is in really solid shape. If you look at sort of top-line GDP growth, which was 1.6% first quarter, ramped up to 2.8, probably is going to come in above 3 for the fourth quarter. That's very good. I mean, trend growth is estimated to be something like 2, a little below by a lot of people. So we're growing rapidly. It's pretty balanced business and household sector. It's what you'd like. Inflation is in the mid-2s, depending on your preferred measure. That's an enormous improvement, not yet at the target. So if this was a sort of standard forecasting exercise, you'd be like, we're good, right? And then you start talking about the risks to the upside and downside, and nearly all of those risks are policy risks. Like, did the Fed in fact ease prematurely? There's some modest evidence that inflation is reaccelerating. The ISM we got this week was really troubling. Prices going up 10% for services. So there's some of that, and so maybe they didn't get that exactly right. Then there's also all the incoming from the Trump administration, which could be tariffs, could be a huge reconciliation bill that blows up the deficit even further, excess fiscal stimulus. So the outlook is in fact quite murky, but it's because of the things that we may have happened to it from the policymakers.
Interesting. So what has the Fed forecasted for this year? Have they given us any ideas about what they might cut, what they might do?
Well, they've scaled back. If you look at the dot plot that the members of the FOMC put out, they've scaled back to what looks like 2 rate cuts from what was originally probably 6 in 2025. So and the language is now moving toward a much more measured tone about further easing. And if I had to bet it, they won't cut in January. And we'll see what happens after that.
Yeah, we get the first jobs days numbers tomorrow. Any ideas what that might show us?
Labor market's essentially slowing modestly. Like the ADP number was 122,000 jobs. But the ISM was in positive territory for services. That's a big part of the economy. New claims for unemployment insurance are down. Vacancies are up. So there's lots of evidence that the job market's hanging in there pretty well. And so this is not a collapsing job market that you'd associate with a hard landing and decline in inflation. It's one that's chugging along pretty well.
Interesting. All right, let's do a trivia question before we go into Congress. Federal agencies collectively finalized blank number in net regulatory costs in 2024. I'll go to you, Doug, first.
In 2024?
Yeah.
Oh, when did that rule come out? Anyway, it's either $200 billion or $1.6 trillion.
It's $1.4 trillion.
Yeah, the rule came out this year.
Jordan,
what do you think? What do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, I was gonna say 1.4.
Yeah, Jordan, I have a second.
Did you study?
No, I looked at the Reg Rodeo yesterday to answer it.
I do have a second. Where does this rank since Reg Rodeo started tracking it in terms of the most costliest year?
I would say
since 2005, since Reg Rodeo started tracking.
I gotta say it's up there. Is it the most costliest?
It is the most costliest. By far. So yes, by far the most costliest year.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyways, we I guess end 2024 on a high note, low note, however you want to say it.
Yeah, no, it's been stunning to watch the Biden administration grind out the regulations. I mean, I didn't think anyone would eclipse the Obama administration anytime soon, and they did it in one term.
Yeah,
amazing.
I mean, and they're still going, right? I mean, there was another one a few days ago on energy.
I mean, who knows? They may, even after he's, gone and President Trump's been sworn in, he'll still try to issue some regulations. We don't know. Look out, Delaware. He's coming home.
Yeah, gotta try to solidify that legacy.
All right. Well, let's go to a different topic, I suppose. All right, Jordan. The 119th Congress has been sworn in, and now the fun really begins. Congress has a long list of day one priorities, and it tends to use the budget and specifically the reconciliation process to get them done. So could you just give us an overview of the key legislative items Congress is trying to address?
Sure. So President Trump is coming into office in 11 days, and he has a very aggressive agenda, and he's made it very clear that he wants to hit the ground running. He's coming in with unified government, but when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, we're talking about a very thin 1 seat margin in the House and a couple seat margin in the Senate. And he's made it clear he wants to focus on immigration, tax reform, energy, and the only way to do that feasibly is through the reconciliation process. So there's been a lot of discourse since the November election of what is reconciliation going to look like, and you had some differing opinions in the House and the Senate. The House was favoring a one bill approach that included everything, so border security, energy, taxes, all into one big beautiful bill, as Trump calls it. And then the Senate was kind of eyeing more of a two-pronged approach. So first they would do a reconciliation bill that addressed all the non-tax items, and then they would move to a bill that addressed the tax items. And I think even at one point there was discussion of a third bill that would include all Trump's campaign proposals, so no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, things like that. Trump met with the Senate GOP last night and kind of tried to make the case for why he's in line with Speaker Johnson and other members of House leadership for a one-bill approach. There were still senators making the argument that it should be a two-prong approach, so they're not quite there, and they need to reach consensus on what they want this process to look like so they can actually get started and drafting the budget resolution and get the process underway.
Yeah, it sounds like a Dr. Seuss kind of argument: one bill, two bill, three bill, type thing.
Yeah.
It's not quite as good as that. It's a one bill, two bill, one bill, two bill. I mean, they need to flip a coin to be done. Yeah. I mean, at some level.
So I mean, but the main parts of this bill are going to be what? A TCJ and immigration, right? The one that they're really the one big one that they want to get done, right?
Yes.
So, all right. Well, so it's been a while since we've done a reconciliation bill, right? So can you just remind us, listeners, me, maybe Doug, I don't know if he pays attention, what the real reconciliation process is and why Congress will need to use it if it wants to pass these key priorities.
Sure. So it's basically a fast-track legislative process. So it limits debate in the Senate to 20 hours, and it also includes a non-debatable motion to proceed to the floor in the Senate. So that essentially eliminates the filibuster. So it allows legislation to be passed with a simple majority, so along party lines. And we've seen this process used in recent years. When the Democrats had control, they did it to do the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act. In 2017, when the Republicans had control, they did this to try to repeal the ACA, and it ultimately passed the TCJA. So it allows a simple majority. They don't need to garner any minority support. If it's a 50-50 split in the Senate, the vice president can cast the tie-breaking vote and they can proceed. So how the process begins is it starts in the House and Senate budget committees with a drafting of a concurrent budget resolution that includes reconciliation instructions for the relevant committees to draft their legislation around. And the budget resolution's got to include 4 things. It's got to include instructions for the relevant committees. It's got to include the dollar amount by which the committees need to, and the target amount that they need to either reduce deficits or increase deficits by, a time frame for which they need to comply, and the dollar amount of relevant spending, relevant changes to spending, revenue, deficits, or debt. So once these instructions are made and the House and the Senate adopt the concurrent budget resolution, the relevant committees get to work on drafting individual bills that meet their target. And once the bill's passed out of committee, it goes to the floor for full consideration. Now, if one of the reconciliation instructions applies to one or more committees, their independent bills need to go to the House or the Senate Budget Committee, and the House and Senate Budget Committees put them together as an omnibus for consideration on the floor. Now, in the Senate, the bill is subject to what's known as the Byrd Rule, and the Byrd Rule applies a few restrictions on the reconciliation legislation. So one of those is that the reconciliation legislation cannot increase budget deficits beyond the 10-year budget window. So we saw this with the TCJA. That's why many of the provisions of the TCJA are scheduled to sunset at the end of this year, because they did that so that the bill would not increase deficits beyond the 10-year budget window. Reconciliation legislation cannot address off-budget items, so Social Security reform cannot be done through the reconciliation process. And also, it can't include any items that don't have a budgetary impact. So for example, during debate over the American Rescue Plan, there was a push to try to increase the federal minimum wage. That was ultimately scrapped from the bill because it had no fiscal impact. It was considered extraneous. So lawmakers in the Senate work with the Senate parliamentarian to put the reconciliation legislation through what's known as a bird bath. It's a real term. It's a real term.
You can't laugh at that.
No, it's a real
That's
term.
a serious moment in this process.
Yes.
I was not expecting that.
To make changes to the bill, to remove any extraneous matters, to ensure that it's Byrd Rule compliant before it's brought to the Senate floor for consideration. So again, because the GOP has very thin margins in the House and Senate, this is the only way to get any of the president's agenda through.
And tough process.
Yes.
And, there's two people outside of, the members that have to that seem to play a big role in this, and that's, of course, the Senate parliamentarian.
Yes.
And the CBO, I would imagine, plays a role in
the Joint Committee.
So, man,
so
good luck.
Let me just say a word about sort of some of the difficulty of this. There's a lot of happy talk about, we got the majorities, here we go, let's go do this. Like this thin majorities, as Jordan emphasized. You have to vote on the budget resolution to begin with, and if they're smart, they'll be identical to begin with. You don't have to have two votes on budget resolutions, but budget resolution votes are bad votes. The reason we don't pass budget resolutions anymore is that, especially in the Senate, you have to have the famed vote-a-rama, where you're allowed unlimited amendments on the budget resolution, but finite amount of time for debate. And so at the end of that, people are just offering amendments that no one's read, and they have to vote on them. And that's all designed to have a bad vote for a campaign ad that'll hurt the next election. So they don't want to do that. But they're going to have to corral everybody, and everyone's going to have to line up and take the vote, including some votes they might not like. Then they have to try and do the same thing on the reconciliation bill, and they're all going to fight about what belongs in it. You got to run the table to get this done, and it's I think harder than anyone appreciates right now.
It seems impossible that they would have been able to do this 3 times.
The ability to make law is a powerful thing.
You would have had to go through 3 vote-a-ramas to do.
Oh yeah, they were talking about doing 3 different reconciliation bills at one point. That I think this is the argument against, part of the argument against the 2-bill approach.
Yeah,
you want one bill because you only want one vote that you have to get everyone to line up for, and if you got everything in one thing, you have more degrees of freedom to massage the content so that everyone can vote for it.
So I mean, I know we're not going for 3 at this point, but how were they going to get that done? Because I mean,
they weren't. Okay, let's just be honest.
Process-wise alone, I mean, how could you get 3? How could you do 3 budget resolutions in one?
Well, they did. Well, they were able to do 2 in 1 year with the American Rescue. Yeah, so they would have to do something like that.
They did 2 in 2017. Failed.
I understand how you could do 2, but like, if you're talking about a third for like tips.
So you can write the reconciliation instructions so that you have a tax bill, a spending bill, and a debt limit bill. So you could easily get 3 reconciliation bills out of one budget resolution.
Okay.
Just depends how you package it.
Yeah. So
So I think the other thing to just keep an eye on is timelines. Like, the sunset is at the end of the year. And people are talking about doing this in the first 100 days. I'm a little closer to the sunset than the first 100 days. This is hard to get done.
Yeah. So, I mean, speaking of outside of the process bumps in the road, I mean, there's bumps in the road coming up when you actually put the packages together, right? So, I mean, what are those?
One of the biggest ways they paid for the 2017. There's a great misnomer that somehow the 2017 Act didn't have any pay-fors in it. It was just all deficit. It's not true at all. About 80% of the corporate provisions were paid for by base broadening. But among the most important ways to pay for the whole thing was capping the deduction on state and local taxes. So now, newly elected Republicans in key states like New York and California, which are high-tax states, want to get rid of that, and the president promised to do something on that on the campaign, and but that makes it much harder to make it add up. So get ready for that fight. I mean, and the list goes on.
Yeah, I mean, I saw they wanted to include debt ceiling in this as well, but that means you couldn't suspend it. You would have to vote on an actual number.
Yeah, Jordan and I had a conversation about this the other day, and we concur that this isn't going to happen because I think 2 reasons. Okay. Number 1, the number. Like, it's fine to suspend the debt ceiling, but it's to take a proactive vote that says, I would like to raise the debt ceiling by $3.5 trillion and then go home and defend it. In some Republican districts, that's a non-starter. So those members are going to be like, no. And the second thing is, we're going to run out of room by something like May or June. Right? There's the famous X date when the Treasury can no longer manage the finances without some sort of change in the debt ceiling. And I don't believe the rest of the package is going to be in shape for final votes by the end of May or June for sure. And so that would just really blow up the process.
Yeah, I snuck in the debt ceiling even though we cut it yesterday, but still got it in there.
Yeah.
What about improvements? I mean, are they going to even look at improvements in this process? I mean, you and Kevin Brady have been writing numerous op-eds about this. Former Congressman Kevin Brady, who helped write the first TCJA.
Ways and Means Chairman, author of a big chunk of the 2017 Act. We both think the right way to think about the task this year is tax reform round 2, not merely just extend the TCJA or don't. It's complicated by the fact that many of the president's proposals, I'm going to say this delicately, are not on the list of things you would do in tax reform. Mm-hmm. They're the list of things that you wouldn't do in tax reform. And so the politics and the policy design are in conflict there.
Interesting. Any final thoughts on this?
I would just say it's going to be a big year. It's going to be a big year.
I'm sure we will be back here talking about it on the podcast again.
And in December of 2025, Jordan's going to be, I guess I picked the wrong year to be fiscal policy director.
All right. Well, I think that's all we have time for today, but thank you both for joining us. Like I said, we'll definitely be talking about this process, so I'm sure we will be sitting in the same room again, talking about it and hoping for new news.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Tune back in for our next episode, where our experts will provide clear, data-driven insights into today's economic and domestic issues. I'd also encourage you to check out any of the links in our show notes and also follow us on social media to learn more about AAF. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Play.